this type of violence inflicted, there's a certain level of depravity involved.
A brutal killing.
She's having a wonderful weekend with her family, then she's gone. Her life here on Earth was over.
I try not to think about how she died.
Bad things happen to good people, unfortunately.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
Was this a neighbor? Was it a coworker? Was it an ex-boyfriend? We weren't sure exactly what happened.
He was telling them that he was on the run and had murdered a woman in Florida.
If he had a clearer view of her home, he would have known that she lived alone.
The truth will be revealed.
My gut was telling me that this was the person who murdered Bernadette Myers.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Sunshine City. That's how locals describe St. Petersburg, Florida.
I think what makes the whole area great here is the fact of the beautiful beaches that we have and the weather. You can do pretty much what you want year-round here in Pinellas County.
It's really considered a really hip and cool place to be nowadays. You get a lot of what I refer to as paradise people that come down for an easy life.
But wherever you have sunshine, you also have shadows.
The Loma neighborhood definitely had seen its better days.
It's an area where it's not unusual to see transients moving in and out.
Here, the home of Bernadette Myers stands out.
Bernadette's home was the nicest one on the block, and she cared a lot about her home, and you could see it.
Bernadette did not show up for work that day, and Bernadette did not answer her phone and did not return any phone calls that had been previously left for her. So one of her friends decided to drive over to Bernadette's house. She looked in through the kitchen windows, and she was able to see what to her appeared to be something red, possibly blood, on the floor in the kitchen.
Detectives Judy Vovan and Larry Nelvin arrive on scene within minutes.
We could see large amounts of blood in the kitchen. We could see the drag marks that went from the kitchen dining room area into the bedroom.
And going into the master bedroom, we found Bernadette Myers face down on the floor with a large amount of blood dried around her head. Her hands were behind her back, duct tape around the wrist, and she had 2 large zip ties put around her neck, and they were cinched up as tight as they could possibly be. Her cause of death was the ligature strangulation. The blunt force trauma to her head was secondary to the asphyxiation. That tells you that Bernadette Myers was alive when those zip ties were put on her neck and cinched up, and when she was dragged into her room and left there.
That was certainly the first murder investigation that I worked at. The zip ties were utilized as an instrument of death. The physicality of it itself was extremely brutal.
Detectives now face the difficult task of breaking the news to loved ones.
Making a death notification to a family member is a very hard thing to do. You're trying to establish whatever you can about your victim from these people that you just shattered and shook up their life.
I remember the moment that they told us, it was just disbelief. It was just a whirlwind of not knowing what took place or what happened. The weekend before she passed away, we were all together in Ocala. It was the entire family, Sunday morning. We were all sitting around. Everybody just laughed and just joked around, and really that was the atmosphere that we had. One of the last pictures that were taken of her, she was holding her great niece and her great nephew. It's a loving moment.
It struck your heart. You know, she's there, she's having a wonderful weekend with her family, and then she's gone. Her life here on earth was over.
She had a son. She had a lot of friends and relatives that she would see on a pretty regular basis.
She was a good family member. She was a good friend.
Monday, I called her because we would always talk about the weekend, and we would laugh and joke and talk about the things that had happened. I called and left her a message. And because of the time frame, I sometimes wonder when that message was being heard.
We spoke to ex-boyfriends, we spoke to coworkers, we spoke to anyone and everyone that could lead us down the road to the killer. We weren't able to find anyone that had anything bad to say about her, or anyone certainly that had threatened her in any way.
Bad things happen to good people, unfortunately.
Determined to fill in the last 24 hours of her life, police interview Bernadette's colleague, who first spotted the blood.
Her friend was very upset, very emotional, but she provided us a lot of good information to help build a timeline. Bernadette worked at Honeywell. They work on parts for the military as well as stuff for the space program. She was an intelligent person, a hard worker. She was an early riser, got to work early, left work, and she was done for the day. We learned that on the Monday, she left work around 2:30 or 3. She had a doctor's appointment, and we know she made it there. We knew that she had a problem with one of her tires. She went to an auto parts store at around 4:30. She was there for maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and then she left. Sometime around 5 o'clock is most likely when she got home.
Clues from the scene suggest she met her killer moments afterwards.
There was like a bag of oranges that were out on the table. Bernadette would have put those away. I mean, that's not something she would leave out. She was very neat, which would imply that she was interrupted in whatever she did as soon as she got home.
Due to the fact that she had not returned any calls and put her groceries away or changed her clothes, we feel that she was murdered somewhere between 5 and 7 o'clock at the latest on Monday.
There was no kicked-in door, there were no screens missing, there were no broken windows. We did think perhaps that our perpetrator was someone that she knew or someone that was familiar with her home. We know that just based on the brutality at the scene, that more than likely it was going to be a man.
There was no DNA of interest found at the scene. And by that I mean they would have found, of course, Bernadette's DNA, which as you would expect.
Not one fingerprint, but one of the forensic examiners at the scene, who was still in the middle of processing, was able to develop a bloody shoe impression on the floor that they were able to enhance using chemicals. We knew it wasn't Bernadette's. Her shoes were in the kitchen floor, and she was knocked out of them. So we felt very strong that this was going to be the bloody shoe impression from the murderer.
The actual impression was believed to be some type of tennis shoe, and the size between 9 and 11.
Her vehicle was not in the garage, So, of course, what I'm going to surmise from that is that whoever murdered her stole her car. Did they steal it because they wanted the car, or did they steal it because they thought it was the best way to get away from that location without being seen? It seemed pretty organized. He was either more prepared than your normal person, or he was able to react somewhat calm after he had done this to figure out how he's going to get out of there. We're looking for anybody and everybody that's associated with Bernadette, that's associated with the area, that would have any reason to be there. My first instinct was this was something that was sexually motivated.
Some of her underwear apparently had been taken out of her dresser, which could be Bernadette doing her laundry, or it could be a fetish, type sex aspect to it.
We have a sexual predator offender tracking unit here at the sheriff's office. They track all the locations of all the sex offenders and sex predators, and they're required to check in and register with them.
The investigators would automatically search the database for any persons in the area that are sexual predators. They would be persons of interest to speak to as soon as possible.
There is one name at the top of their list.
Leo Barobri was brought to our attention by the sexual predator unit. He was a convicted sexual predator who had committed a violent rape.
He lived within around a mile of Bernadette Myers. His offenses had to do with adult women.
There's some leopards out there with spots on that don't change.
So, of course, we wanted to look into him, try to find out where he might have been on the day that Bernadette was murdered.
The lead suspect in Bernadette Myers' homicide is a convicted sex offender.
So we wanted to find him and talk with him to try and establish a timeline.
If somebody is determined by police to have a record for sexual assault, especially if it's a record for violence and sexual assault, they are examined more thoroughly by police to see if they're capable of committing an even worse assault, and in this case, that would be murder.
Police obtain Barubi's address from the offender tracking unit.
In my being, I knew he was a dirtbag. When we spoke to Mr. Barobi, he had recently injured himself.
He said he had suffered a broken foot previously and had to use the crutches to get around on. I think it would have been very hard for somebody that truly has to use crutches to be able to do what was done to Bernadette. But we still wanted to make every effort to make sure he wasn't just using that as a crutch. We were able to timeline his injury out by talking to his place of employment, and they were able to confirm with us that he had had this injury prior to Bernadette's murder.
He got out of work that afternoon at 3:30, and he had to wait for a ride. So as far as the timeline goes, he wouldn't have been able to make it from where he was to Bernadette's house to commit the murder because of the physical injury.
To be certain, detectives turned to the forensic evidence.
When we got the autopsy results, it was determined that there was no sexual assault to Bernadette Myers. So all of that was against Leo Barubi being involved in this. We were able to rule him out as being a suspect in this homicide. Now that we knew that she was not the victim of a sexual assault, obviously the person went through something in her room and was searching for something.
Detective Nalvin and I invited Michelle and Christopher, that's Bernadette's niece and her son, to come to the house to hopefully be able to assist us. As hard as it was, we were hoping that they were going to be able to give us some key information in regards to the items that were missing, that we couldn't recognize as being missing because we had never been in that home before.
Everything had its place at Aunt Bernadette's house. Bernadette kept a very, very nice house. You could eat off her floor.
It was very emotional for them. It was extremely emotional. But they put their grief aside, and they were very focused on helping us find the killer.
At first, they really couldn't tell if anything was missing until her son said, I think that my mom had a wooden jewelry box on her dresser top.
There was several items of jewelry that she kept in that jewelry box.
Some items that they said were very unique, and that's what we kind of focused in on at that point in time.
Christopher drew pictures of the jewelry for us, but also Michelle, her niece, brought in a photograph of Bernadette from the family gathering that happened in Ocala the weekend before her murder. Bernadette was wearing a two-tone Anne Klein watch in the photograph, and it was on her wrist. And that was a watch that we did not find at the crime scene.
If you can identify property that's been stolen from a residence, it's a very valuable lead for the police because you can trace back who possessed that property to prove that the suspect was in the house.
That kind of explained potentially the undergarments that were on the bed and on the floor. We felt that the person went through the drawers looking for more jewelry or money or something of value. Her house was almost like a little bit of an oasis in the middle of this area. So people might think that this person, because they take care of their house, has money or has valuables inside of there. There's all kinds of people going by that residence all the time. It's a very heavily traveled road. So you start thinking, was somebody staking out her residence?
Investigators focus on the area surrounding Bernadette's house, looking for anything out of the ordinary.
We received a phone call from my sergeant at the time, who was out in an alley that runs behind Bernadette Meyer's house. And he said he was with an individual and that we needed to come meet with them. And that's when we first encountered Lee Davey. Lee Davey happened to be walking down the alley as my sergeant was walking down the alley, and he sees Lee approaching him, holding in his hand about a 34 to 36 inch long zip tie.
Davey is also found walking in the alley at the same time of day Bernadette was killed.
So the proximity is there, he's got the zip tie, and he certainly looks like he would be a strong enough individual that could have exerted the amount of violence on Bernadette.
He was a person of interest to us, a very strong person of interest.
In my mind, I'm thinking, this could be our killer.
Detectives have identified a man named Lee Davey, found carrying zip ties near Bernadette Meyer's house.
Of course, he knows who she is because he sits at the bus stop across from her house. He lives across the street. He walks the alley.
So of course, we're assessing him, we're looking at his feet. Does he wear the same size tennis shoes? His mannerism, is he perspiring?
He brought us over to his apartment that he lived in, let us search through his whole entire apartment, let us look at all his shoes.
He actually was cooperative with us. But sometimes that's not unusual because sometimes the bad guys think they're gonna outsmart you.
Lee claims to have been at work in the time frame Bernadette was killed.
People will lie. Very, very dangerous to accept at face value that what you're being told is entirely the truth. Your job is to take the information, try to corroborate what you're being told.
He didn't have a violent history, so there was no motive there.
His shoe size was smaller than that we were looking for, that the killer had left behind.
And there was nothing that tied him to Bernadette.
His alibi also checks out.
The zip tie, he indicates that he found it near the bus station down in St. Pete, which is a distance away, and he grabbed it and just walked home with it. So for his case, I think it's a matter of timing. Bad timing for him to be walking down the alley carrying a zip tie.
When you have a person of interest that you believe could have committed this crime, you are putting all your efforts into that. And then once it gets to the point that you are able to confirm that this person, in fact, was not the killer, it's a little disappointing. But that's the truth of it. Word had spread in the neighborhood because of the crime scene tape being there. Word had spread at her job. So people were calling in as well and giving us information, giving us leads. There was a phone call from a woman named Sunshine. Sunshine was very well known in the law enforcement community in the Lellman area. She was very familiar with the streets because at times she lived on them. She had had some run-ins with the law herself. So we certainly knew exactly who she was. And she called in and provided us some information that she'd seen a black male in the alley right before the time of Bernadette's death.
She also said she saw the same person run through Bernadette's yard and then saw that person at a convenience store down the street later. So we went out and met with that convenience store. But there's no surveillance footage because their equipment's not working.
They were panning for gold there, just, sifting through everything, trying to figure out where is this going to take us. When you really have nothing, you're just searching, one of the things you'd say, well, is anybody doing burglaries around that time frame? You start looking for any creep-in burglaries or people are at home, because the vast majority of home burglaries, there's nobody at home. And burglars don't want to break into people's houses when people are there.
It led us to Curtis Bryant.
He became a person of interest because, that was kind of his MO, going to people's houses in that area and breaking in while they were there.
Bryant's description matches that of the man seen by Sunshine near Bernadette's house.
In the process of finding Curtis Bryant, he was arrested on a burglary charge.
He broke into a residence while somebody was home, and it happened to be a female, an adult female, in close proximity to Bernadette's residence, within 8 blocks, and they were also in a stolen car.
So when Detective Nalvin and I had the opportunity to interview him about Bernadette's death, he was actually in custody. Unfortunately, that day, Mr. Bryant lacked a moral compass.
He listened to us talk, but he refused to answer specific questions, and at one point he ended up telling us he didn't want to talk anymore.
Well, if I'm his lawyer, the first thing I tell him to do is you do not talk to the police, ever. And if you do, you're an idiot. Because anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
They search Bryant's house, hoping to uncover evidence linking him to Bernadette's murder.
He lived in a little room inside of a garage and paid rent there. And we searched around in the garage.
We were looking for anything that may have been taken from the murder scene or brought to the murder scene.
We found duct tape. We found some decent length zip ties, pretty close to the length of the ones that we had on Bernadette Myers. However, the zip ties was a different manufacturer. The duct tape had a different grain and texture to it. We collected his shoes. His shoe size did not appear to fit with the size of the impression that we had. Nothing was tying him to her. Nothing was tying him to the scene.
Bryant looks set to be ruled out when police make an important discovery.
When we found Bernadette's car, it was at a local auto parts store right around the corner from Bernadette's. That was somewhat exciting to hear. Finding the car where it was in such close proximity, it kind of supported the theory that we had that the person got in the car to get away from her residence without being seen.
They look for physical evidence that places him in the vehicle.
We were hoping we'd get lucky and get DNA from the suspect. We had it towed back to our forensic lab, and it was processed. They were able to recover blood from the top of the steering wheel, from the gear shifter. They recovered it from the armrest. We had it submitted to the crime lab in hopes of it belonging to the suspect. However, all of that came back to Bernadette Myers. very deflating every time you're sending something off that you feel has a good potential of having DNA associated to the suspect, and it's coming back to your victim.
Their final hope in connecting Bryant to Bernadette lies with the timeline.
At that point in time, when Bernadette was murdered, Curtis worked for a seawall construction company, and we were able to get in touch with his boss, and we were able to confirm that he was at work and what time they worked till that day, which would have made it impossible for him to make it from where he was to Bernadette's for that.
Detectives now worry about the case growing cold.
Morale was kind of stretched, but you keep pushing ahead. You know, you have a victim that you want to find justice for her, and you have family members.
I mostly remember how I always felt they were going to catch the person that did this. I really, really felt strongly that they were going to do that. I don't think they turned it off ever. I think that they carried the weight of this case until it was done. So we were able to really put our grief aside and put all our faith in them.
Convinced Bernadette's murder was a well-planned crime of opportunity, police broadened their neighborhood search, determined to identify anything unusual from her final 24 hours.
In Bernadette's case, what made it unique and somewhat difficult was the fact that it was a transient area. It's a lot of people coming and going. We went back out again to do some more canvassing, and there was a decent-sized auto dealership right at the end of Bernadette Street. We talked to an employee, and she had some very good information for us. Going back to Monday, the day that we know Bernadette was murdered, she was parked across the street on the north side of the road, and at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she saw an individual standing next to a van that was parked next to her car. 30-year-old white male, 5'10", brown hair. She got in her car and she left. She came back about 45 minutes later. And when she came back, the van was still there.
And the interesting thing is that how he was parked, if he looked down the street, he could see Bernadette's home.
It was in direct sight of Bernadette's residence, for the front door and the driveway and most of her yard. I thought, great, maybe this person was looking that direction and could remember seeing something happen at Bernadette's residence. The individual was now seated inside the van, and as she got out, he made a comment to her without her even saying a word to him. "I'm waiting to meet somebody." He volunteers that to her, which she thought was kind of weird. And she goes into work. And about 15 minutes later, which would now be about 5 o'clock, she goes to leave for the day. He's still there. I asked her if there's anything that stood out about the van, and she remembered that it had a magnet on the side of the van from a local painting company.
This was something certainly that we had to follow up on. Who was he? Was there a line from him to Bernadette? Was this someone that Bernadette knew? Because of the business name on the side of the van, we knew where we were going to go next. We were going to find out who was this person in this van.
Investigators on the Bernadette Myers case worked to track down a mystery man seen outside her home on the day of the murder.
So we went and found the owner of the painting company. And the owner is very good friends of Bernadette Myers. So that struck a chord. He informed us that he himself had painted the inside her residence about 4 years prior. And then 3 years ago, the outside of her residence was painted by 2 of his workers. One of them who was currently incarcerated in prison, and the other one was named Charles Hall.
Detectives bring Halm in for an interview.
He told me and confirmed that he did paint her house 3-4 years ago, as he remembered it. Said it took about a week to paint it. He kind of alluded that they were kind of friendly when he painted her house, that she would leave her doors unlocked so they could use the restroom. So I asked him if he had been by there recently. And he said no. And I said, well, you sure? Sure you wouldn't have been somewhere around there to meet somebody? And he kind of said, oh, yeah, I was. He kind of committed to parking in the same area that he was observed in.
He reluctantly admitted that he was there, knowing that there was probably a witness that saw him there.
I asked him for his help to see if he saw anybody over there, and he said, yeah, I could see right to her house, but no, I didn't see anybody. He was thinking out loud at this point to himself, who was I there to meet? Who was it? And he was looking up into the ceiling and looking left and looking right, and he kind of just looked over at us and said, I don't know, beats me. I can't remember who it was. He parked in a spot, for an hour and waited to meet somebody, but can't remember who he was going to meet. I didn't believe him.
We did notice during the course of the interview that Mr. Holmes' shoe size looked like it could have been the shoe size that we were looking for, but there was no real evidence to hold him.
At that point in time, I'd gotten information from him that I could follow up on, and I sent him on his way, and asking him to call me when he thinks of who this person, alleged person was that he was supposed to meet. We put our surveillance team on him to establish where he's going and coming and who he's associating with so we can start talking to them.
When you're a seasoned investigator and you have to allow them to go, it's gut-wrenching. Not everyone can work homicide. It's very demanding, and it can be incredibly stressful. You have to be able to shift gears very quickly, and you have to have a really strong belief in the law and in justice.
As they begin the follow-up on Holm, the investigation takes a bizarre turn.
There was bulletins that were put out about the circumstances of her death to other law enforcement agencies.
We get a call from Alma Police Department in Arkansas about an individual who they called a hitchhiker that had been dropped off by some people because he was telling them that he was on the run and had murdered a woman in Florida. When law enforcement in Arkansas had contact with him, in going through the stuff, he had some zip ties.
It's a coincidence they can't ignore. So they work towards linking the man to Bernadette.
By going through all these different reports and different associates surrounding this individual, we are able to see at one point in time that a girlfriend of his that lived almost on the same block as Bernadette Myers.
They discover an incident report revealing the hitchhiker had a violent past.
He had been involved in a shooting and a kidnapping, so to speak, with an ex-girlfriend or ex-wife. So you see that there's a violent tendency from this unstable person. And then you have the fact that he's saying he murdered a woman in Florida. We are doing everything we can to try and establish where he's been for this time, because he wasn't with the people that he was hitchhiking with anymore, and law enforcement had already sent him on his way, and now he was in the wind. It was very frustrating.
They work to place their new suspect in Bernadette's neighborhood at the time she was killed.
If you can get the timeline right, you can prove or break the suspect's alibi.
We found evidence he was in some facility in Tennessee during the time frame of Bernadette's murder. There was nothing put in him in this area recently. As this investigation went on, it seemed that everybody we came into contact with now all of a sudden is either carrying a zip tie or has them in their garage. None of them were the size of the ones that we found on Bernadette. You want tips to come in, but it depends. Sometimes you get a lot that don't lead you anywhere. Some are good, but you can't pick and choose which ones you get, so you have to work all of them.
The investigation gains new traction when the surveillance team makes an important discovery about painter Charles Hom.
We learned that he was a frequent pawner. A lot of his pawn activity was tools and construction equipment, things of that nature. In Florida, when you pawn anything, you're required to, 1, provide a photo ID, and 2, you're required to provide a thumbprint. If we have any suspicion that could have been a robbery or burglary, you're going to look for somebody pawning this stuff to get the money for it.
Detective Nelvin checks Holmes' most recent pawn activity.
After Bernadette Myers' murder, he pawned some women's jewelry.
We traveled to the pawn shops. And based on the drawings by Christopher, we were able to determine that there were several items pawned by Mr. Hom that belonged to Bernadette. These items were sent to the lab for a DNA test.
On the pink coral ring was our one piece of DNA evidence that belonged to Bernadette Myers, which proved that that was her ring. And the concerning part about it is that we're finding that in one particular transaction, he was pawning this before we'd even found her body inside her house on Tuesday.
That was a true breaking point.
With the circumstantial evidence mounting against Charles Hom, detectives are able to subpoena more of his records from the day of the murder.
We got his phone records, and we're able to see what I would describe as a frantic attempt to get a hold of a friend of his named Gary.
It shows a flurry of phone calls, like I think it's 6:20 or 6:22 that evening.
The calls fall right within the time frame of Bernadette's murder, making Gary their next priority.
Gary told us that he was friends with Charles Hom, and he also told us that he had gotten some jewelry from Charles. He also told us that his wife had some of the jewelry. So at that point in time, we go find his wife, Kimber. As I looked at the watch that she's wearing on her wrist, immediately flashed this picture that the family had provided to me of when Bernadette was in Ocala one day before she was murdered.
She was actually wearing Bernadette's watch. There's a part of me that thought that, there was some divine intervention happening there. That's one of those moments that you pray for.
I think the stars just aligned with us having the weekend together, and it was just such a beautiful weekend, but that we had the picture of the watch.
As Charles Hom is charged with first-degree murder, detectives can now identify the critical details from Bernadette's final 24 hours and the events that drew her ever closer to a desperate killer.
The day before, Bernadette had been with her son visiting some relatives in Ocala.
Bernadette came home Sunday evening. She went to work on Monday.
She stopped a couple places on her way home for errands.
Charles Hom sat in his van for an hour waiting for her to get home. He knows that she has a nice house. He knows where she works, so he knows that she's more well off than most people in that area.
Now, whether when he was watching her house, his plan was to kill her, it's possible. He was doing a lot of drugs at that time. Heroin, cocaine, crack cocaine.
She went home that night expecting to have a quiet evening. She put her things down, and Mr. Hom was at the back door. And she probably answered it. She was a friendly person. And she recognized him.
And he probably thought he might be able to smooth talk her into getting some money. But she will tell people her mind. Probably told him to pack sand. He was upset. That's when he attacks her.
He repeatedly struck her in the back of the head with some type of blunt weapon. And he continued to strike her until she went down. To make sure that she was not going to be on this earth any longer, Then he took zip ties and he put them around her neck and used those zip ties to drag her body from the kitchen area into her bedroom, where he left her face down with her head in a pool of blood.
He was panicked at some point because he was trying to reach out to his friend Gary at that point in time, frantically. He then used the idea of going through her garage to get in her car to leave without being seen, to go park down the street, to be able to walk back to his van that he was in, and then drive away. Then, the following day, Charles Halm pawned jewelry that belonged to Bernadette Myers 3 hours before we found her. Finding the pawn transaction that's done before her body's found with the jewelry that we know is hers, and then finding this watch that she was wearing not even 24 hours before she was murdered, to me was a huge moment.
He probably looked at it as she could be an easy target as far as that goes. And so in that regard, it's not random. It's random from the standpoint that she did nothing to encourage this. And that's the scary part. You know, there truly are evil people out there that prey on innocent folks.
Ultimately, Charles Halm was convicted of first-degree murder for killing Bernadette Myers. He's serving life with no chance of parole. You're talking about a couple $100 ultimately. A couple highs is what he got out of this. Murdered her brutally. To think about somebody going through that in the last minutes of their life is always stuck in my memory. Being able to put Charles Halm in prison for the rest of his life was very satisfying.
There's parts of every homicide that you always have with you. The part about this case, about Bernadette Myers' death and her murder that stuck with me the most was the courage of her family, even at their time of grief, to help us with the investigation. Without their help, we wouldn't have been able to go forward.
I try not to think about how she died. I like to think about how she lived. Bernadette was so funny, and we laughed all the time. She was our aunt, she was a sister, she was a best friend. Sunday morning, we were all just sitting there visiting. And Bernadette was sitting next to me. And she looked me right in the eyes and told me why she loved me. It doesn't get any better than that.
Two people shot in the head, execution style. That looks like a hit to me.
A brutal killing.
The shocking part is that it was a family, newlyweds, starting out their life.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
She wasn't going to see him anymore because she was dating someone else.
They had an argument. He was mad, and he was going to kill him.
He had driven by the home. Is it a stalking situation?
He kind of ripped him off. And you don't do that to the Brotherhood.
The truth will be revealed.
He lived a very dark world, and he knew that he was going to be exposed.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Holland, Michigan. One of the Midwest's oldest and prettiest towns.
It's kind of originally a Dutch community that was formed many, many years ago.
It's a small community. It's very common for you to leave your doors unlocked, leave your keys in your car. Just a good place, nice place to live.
But a double homicide changes that in an instant.
When I first got to the scene, I was approached by the responding officer. He informed me that there was a female victim in the house and that there was another victim in the automobile outside of the house.
The couple are identified as Rick and Gail Brink.
The victim in the house was lying on her back in bed. She had 3 wounds in her head. The male victim had 2 bullet holes in the left side of his head.
The passenger front window was shot out, so there was at least 3 rounds that we knew of that were shot.
He was lying face down. His torso was over the console, and his head was face down on the passenger seat.
Detective Lauren Wasink is now responsible for finding the couple's killer.
Your on-the-spot reporter, reporting to you from Ransom Street. This is the new residence of Rick and Gail Brink.
It was a family, just a newlyweds, lived out in the country, starting out their life. They recently just bought this house with the help of Rick's father. And the house needed a lot of work, and between he and Gail, they done the work over a period of months to get it prepared to live in.
Now that we've got that on film, at least soundtrack.
They had a lot of friends, well-liked. Gail was always a very social person. Rick was in sales in his company, very respected, was doing very well.
Again.
The shocking part is the fact there was someone out there who was capable of killing this young family.
Rick, on the ranch, signing off.
Bye.
The key to solving their murder will be in unpacking every detail of the last day of their lives.
Whenever you're doing any type of investigation, it's just kind of basic that you do get a timeline where your victims were prior to their homicide.
The first indication that particular morning that there may have been a problem was when Rick didn't show up for work. His employer called a company where Gail worked, found out that Gail didn't come to work. Someone in the meantime got a hold of Rick's parents. Rick's mother decided that she'd like to go out there and check. So the bodies were discovered by Rick's parents. Based on the medical examiner, stomach contents gives us a pretty good idea that they were probably killed between Saturday night late and early Sunday morning.
Detectives examine the crime scene to determine the events leading up to the murder.
Rick was dressed in his dress slacks. I believe he had on suspenders, a belt, and a shirt. And then he had on his work galoshes that he appears to have kind of slid on.
It appeared as though Rick might have been drinking a beer, watching TV. At some point, something caused him to put his boots on and his coat on and to go out to the vehicle. But the ignition was off, the window was rolled 3/4 down, cold weather, why is his window open? Was Rick on his way someplace? And did he then encounter someone? At that time, we didn't know. We checked for casings inside and outside of the house. None were found.
So either the suspect cleaned up the shell casings, or it was a revolver and they remained within the gun. After autopsies, it was confirmed that they were .22 caliber rounds.
Gail's dress was basically dropped along the floor next to the bed. So it would have appeared that she would have basically disrobed and then crawled right in bed.
The contents of Gail's purse were emptied out. Rick's wallet was lying there open. There was $400 and some in a drawer, so we don't feel robbery was an issue at all.
That, to me, says it was somebody who knew the victim.
From there on, it was from the inner circle and going out, talking to family members and seeing what they knew.
As police continue to work the scene, Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden, arrives.
Ryan and his sister always seemed to have gotten along well. He was obviously somewhat distraught over what had happened. Ryan indicated that he was with his girlfriend, Pam, all weekend.
Ryan said they didn't see Rick and Gail, and they didn't find out that they were dead until Monday morning.
Ryan is, however, quick to tell detectives about a turbulent relationship from Gail's past.
Ryan told us about Gail's ex-boyfriend. Lars was quite a serious boyfriend. In fact, they lived together for a length of time and were planning on getting married. Well, that fell apart when Gail met Rick.
Ryan tells detectives when they parted ways, things turned violent.
Lars had packed up Gail's belongings, knowing she was going to come and pick them up. They got into a confrontation about what she was taking. And he slapped Gail.
Gail's brother Ryan went after him, and, he backed off right away.
Jealousy can be a very powerful, potent emotion that drives people to do irrational things and violent things.
Ryan then adds something that potentially puts Lars directly on the timeline of the murder.
Ryan had told us that he talked to Lars at a laundromat on Saturday evening before this killing. Lars asked how Gail was doing.
Lars said he was going to the bar, what's called Calypso's.
It's the same bar where Rick and Gail went after attending a wedding earlier in the day.
So then you think, if they would have gone to Calypso's, they would have seen Gail's ex-boyfriend. Did he see Gail? Did it just kind of ignite all those feelings? Did something happen there?
If you're looking for some type of a motive, Lars would have had one.
Detectives have identified their first person of interest in the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink, Gail's ex-boyfriend, Lars.
Sometimes an obsession can start with a small kernel and grow. And it can grow to the point where people will commit murder.
We interviewed Lars. I asked him how he felt about Gail and about Rick. He said he would be happy if Rick and Gail split up because he still loved her.
At one point, he admitted that he had driven by the home just because, he was really infatuated with her.
He indicated to me that he still had a wedding picture of Rick and Gail in his belongings.
Police shift their focus to his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
He admitted that he had gone with a friend to Calypso's, where the wedding party went after the reception. Lars said he actually recalled seeing some people come in from a wedding, but that he did not even know that Gail was at that wedding. Then he had actually, after that, gone home and was there for the night.
He said he might have got back at midnight.
Detectives must determine if Lars is telling the truth.
We started interviewing those people that were present at the wedding, trying to gain any information that we could get, whether there had been some difficulties between the two of them.
Gail was not a really big drinker, and I think she had had some champagne and got a little tipsy. When you start adding alcohol to any incident, sometimes, you know, either people are gonna be happy drunks or they're not gonna be. But there was no fight that broke out. And everybody said Rick was just kind of, you know, good old Rick. Come on, I'm gonna take my wife home.
And talking to persons with Rick and Gail, they thought they left between 10:30 and 11:30 at night.
And that was the last they were seen.
This lines up with Lars' version of events, but doesn't rule out the possibility he went to their house later that night.
We polygraphed him. Lars was more than willing to take a polygraph. He passed without any problem. Looking at the whole scope of it, the polygraph, his demeanor, his feelings towards Gail, I'm convinced he would have never hurt Gail, even though he slapped her. People can wrong you. You don't go kill them. I felt in my mind that Lars was not involved and we should go on to some other place. And by that time, there was tips coming in, many calls about the person who lived there prior to Rick and Gail Brink.
Sid Colby lived there with his girlfriend, and they were about to lose the home, so they sold it. He was a road knight, which is a biker gang that was in existence in the Holland area. If ever there was anything going on that was illegal, a lot of times Sid Colby was involved in it. People were concerned, could he have been involved because of the fact that Sid was not happy that he lost this home?
He was always on the edge, always dealing in drugs. He tried to impress people that I'm armed, you don't mess with me, you don't mess with my girlfriend.
Sid Colby, he was crazy. I mean, he was nuts. He was a habitual liar, and he was paranoid.
A lot of the paranoia, I think, was because he took a lot of drugs.
So it was definitely something you had to look at. It carried a little different priority level than just random guy that lived there.
They managed to track a skittish Sid Colby down at his new place.
We determined that that night, Sid said he was at a local bar where he hung out frequently, and then he said he went home. But once it got after midnight, we weren't too sure where Sid was anymore.
There's a lot of steps or hoops that a trained investigator is going to go through when they receive information, let's say from a criminal. Lack of credibility is going to be a problem for them.
So we had a polygraph done. Polygraph was that Sid was telling us the truth when he said he was not involved in the crime. There was just nothing there that we could come up with which would cause any type of a motive. As strange as what Sid was, he didn't have any guts at all. He's scared, he's paranoid, and I don't think Sid could do it.
When detectives press Sid for information, he puts forward an interesting theory.
He told the investigators about people that were after him and his girlfriend, and he felt that they were the intended victims of this shooting. They had very dangerous connections with a motorcycle group out of Detroit. He'd sell them narcotics, but he'd either short them or he wouldn't pay enough, and he'd get in trouble because of it.
He had actually been shot at, allegedly, out at the local motorcycle club's house.
But it was one event in particular that led Sid to believe he'd become a target.
At one point, Sid had agreed to fix a car for one of the group's girlfriends. And Sid and his girlfriend, Chico, decided they'd be better off selling the car. They used the money for themselves, and obviously got into a lot of hot water with this group out of Detroit.
If you're in a motorcycle gang, you don't do that to the Brotherhood.
He claims that after that, these people came to his house to get him prior to this killing, and he ran them off with an automatic rifle.
Sid believes this may have led the gang to hire a hitman.
He'd be told where to go, and that there'll be a guy and a gal at that house, and their job would be to take care of the guy and the gal. And Sid believed that this was what happened with Rick and Gail, and that it was meant for he and Chico.
2 people shot in the head, execution style. That looks like a hit to me.
Michigan detectives believe the Brink murders may be a result of mistaken identity. A gang hit meant for the former owner of the house.
In the drug world, if you don't pay your drug debt, this is what happens. But in a lot of cases, no one's going to talk because the code of the street of not cooperating or helping the police, therefore becoming a rat, is very strong.
Detectives must find a way to place the gang at the scene of the crime. They contact a narcotics unit with agents placed inside the organization.
The informant we had was set up through the Michigan State Police. They had persons in this motorcycle gang that should have been able to determine whether or not this motorcycle group was involved. 2 names came up. One was Ghetto Rat, the other was Grizz. Grizz, within a week of this homicide, was shot and killed in Detroit. Ghetto Rat was interviewed. He said, if our club killed him, he said, I'd have been there. And he said, it didn't happen. Obviously, this is just a statement from him, but he was very believable. The scenario of this motorcycle group out of Detroit coming there to kill Sid Colby and Chico made some sense, but there was nothing there. So now you're weeks into this thing with a lot of hope, and all of a sudden that's gone.
Without any new leads, the case begins to stall.
There isn't anybody else out there that we could come up with that had any motive or any reason to kill Rick and Gail Brink. With a motive, it's pretty difficult to solve the crime. I would go back to the family, telling them we don't have anything more, telling them that we're going to keep working on it, and each time going back and not having anything to give them, I think was the most difficult and frustrating part of it.
In 1995, Detective Wassink retires after 31 years on the force.
I didn't like leaving with open cases. Some of these cases can wear on you. This one probably weighed on me the greatest of all of them.
In 2011, 24 years after the murders. The investigation is assigned to cold case detectives Venus Repper and David Blakely.
You had to go back into the books, relearn everything that they did.
We always had a philosophy that the person who did it is in there. It was a matter of going through the detective notes and putting those in order, doing it chronological.
In cold case investigations, you will, from time to time, find the killer in the original box, we'll call it, of evidence. In this case, the violence portrayed at the crime scene would suggest it was someone known to the deceased. Access to the crime scene, no sign of forced entry.
During their review, something odd stands out to Detective Repper.
When we looked through the crime scene photos, one of the questions, there was a pillow that was placed over Gail's face. The pillow was actually a pillow that would belonged in the living room. If it would have been put there beforehand, you would see some type of bullet holes. The pillow had blood residue, so it would have been placed there after Gail had been murdered. So we knew that it had to be the killer who put the pillow over her face.
Why is a pillow from the living room over the head of the victim in the bedroom?
That, to me, was more like somebody not wanting to look at him.
That emotionally says, I don't want to see this. The kind of individual you're looking at knew Rick and Gail very well.
This prompts the cold case detectives to focus on Rick and Gail's families.
You must look at the family. You have to eliminate them. Certainly if there's insurance, valuables, assets involved, we have a recipe for potential disaster.
We first interviewed Bud, Rick's brother. One of the things we found out was that if something happened to Rick, Bud would be the one to inherit everything.
Wills can tear families apart. That could be a motive for someone to get very upset and perhaps commit murder.
Those were questions that we posed to him as far as whether he was responsible, whether he was involved in the homicide. Bud was college educated, he had a good job. He himself was a success on his own. He said he and his brother really had a good relationship. As far as his alibi, he was actually home with his wife. There was no animosity, there was nothing to indicate that there was any issue between Bud and Rick.
They turn their attention towards Gail's family.
Gail had a very challenging childhood. She came from a very large family. Her mother, I don't think she was capable of caring for as many children as what she had.
I think there was just some real dysfunction going on there, and so the kids were the ones that were responsible for taking care of themselves.
They talk to Cheryl Murphy, Gail's older sister.
They had a really good relationship. She basically helped raise Gail. She does not live in the state and doesn't maintain everyday contact with her family. Before Dave and I got the case, another detective asked her, write down some conversations you've had or some things pertaining to this. She had some concerns about her brother Ryan. Cheryl would say Ryan's controlling. He wants you to do what he says, and her and him did not get along. They butted heads. She said, he's my brother, but he's a control freak. There were some red flags that we were like, that's not right. Something's wrong there. So we found out as much information as we could about Ryan.
Cheryl tells detectives about a family dispute that had been brewing the week before the murder.
Ryan was renting a house, and her parents and the younger siblings were living in a trailer in Ryan's driveway. He had indicated that his landlord had gotten upset about it and wanted him out of there.
Cheryl says this prompted Ryan to call Gail the day before she was killed.
He told Gail, you got that house, let mom and dad come live with you. And she basically told him, no, I'm not gonna do it. Rick won't allow it. It's not gonna happen. She had actually told her, he's mad, he's furious.
That had never been learned by the original investigators.
I interviewed Cheryl Murphy several times, but she never told us that Gail had called her on the Friday night prior to the murder and told her what a violent confrontation she and Ryan had had.
Cheryl goes even further.
She said that when her father had told them that Gail and Rick were dead, Ryan got up and went right to Rick and Gail's house. She's like, how did he know they were at the house? He didn't ask or anything. All these years, Ryan had gone under the radar and not really been looked at. He needed to be looked at a lot more.
Cold case detectives investigating the murder of Rick and Gail Brink have focused their attention on Gail's brother Ryan.
We wanted to have it where when we interviewed Ryan, we knew about him. We kind of thought there was something there.
They learn Ryan is now married to the woman he was with the night the murders happened, Pam Wingarden.
As far as for Ryan's alibi back in '87, he had indicated that he and Pam had gone to a laundromat to do laundry, 5 to 8-ish. And then from there, they went over to Pam's girlfriend's house where they hung out there. And I believe Ryan then took Pam home around 2 in the morning.
Aiming to verify their version of events, detectives bring Ryan and Pam in for questioning.
We made that tactical decision to interview Pam first because we knew Ryan's a control freak. He thought he was going to be able to be interviewed with her. So we told him to come back, but he said, no, I'll wait here.
Detectives ask Pam about the story she told 25 years ago.
She said basically, I don't remember, I can't remember. And I'm just like, well, we're just asking you to be truthful.
Pam was very reluctant. One of the things that Venus did was gain trust. She built rapport.
She finally admitted that Ryan was not with her that night. So we knew something was up. But at that point, she's like, I'm gonna go home. And I asked her, are you gonna be okay? Because I was concerned if he's this controlling, and you just told us that you lied for your husband. I mean, we gave her every opportunity. Well, she left. We knew Pam knew more than what she was saying, but wasn't really willing to share yet. We didn't feel she was responsible for it, but we weren't able to make an arrest. So we then brought Ryan in. And he didn't care for women. So actually, Dave took the lead on this interview.
His body language was total deception.
We told him, your wife said you weren't with her. Well, she's confused. No, she's confused. This is what we did.
He didn't want us to talk to Pam. He didn't want us to do a complete investigation.
He denied any involvement in his sister and brother-in-law's homicide.
If your brother or your sister was murdered and you had nothing to do with it, you would do everything you could to help. And here you have a blood brother not helping.
Pretty much after that, Ryan left.
With differing accounts from Pam and Ryan, detectives must find a way to verify his whereabouts the night his sister was murdered.
Back in 1987, Ryan was not only dating Pam, but he was dating another girl named Chris. So we then went and interviewed her. Talked to her about her relationship with Ryan and things that had happened. She said, Ryan wanted kids, I couldn't give him kids.
And so that was the demise of their relationship.
We kind of went through the interview. We were there for maybe an hour. And then we're kind of like, okay, anything else? No. And literally, we're like getting up out of our chairs, and she's like, well, there is this one thing. And we look at each other and we sit back down and we're like, well, what is it? And she proceeds to tell us about how Ryan came over and told her his sister had been murdered. And it was 2 days after they were found, and asked, can you go with me for a ride? And she's like, then he drove me around. We went to the park. And she goes, he sat there and he was crying and he was talking about what a terrible person he was. And she's like, you know, I was afraid he was gonna tell me he killed her. And we said, what did he tell you? And at that point she said that he had said he had a sexual relationship with her, that he basically had raped his sister. That it happened more than once, and that she wasn't willing.
That was huge. That was the aha moment. If Gail had told Rick about the abuse, Ryan was going to be exposed. The question at that time was, is the aha moment going to turn into a confession?
Detectives Repper and Blakely bring Ryan in for a second interview.
Dave started talking to him about his relationship with Gail.
I was repeatedly asking him to tell me about that, what happened there. And he would respond with, what are you getting at, Dave? It was a pretty intense time.
We sat there, it was like 40 seconds, just staring. It was a stare down. And finally, Ryan admitted at that point that he had a sexual relationship with his sister. And he said it was just kids play, kids play. We kind of threw out there, well, you told Chris that, you know, it was basically like rape. He again downplayed the abuse. It was experimentation. No one was hurt. It only happened a little bit, and that was it.
Despite this admission, Ryan remains steadfast in denying his involvement in the murders.
So we still didn't have enough, but we at least had now a different path that we were going.
Detectives must prove beyond doubt that Ryan pulled the trigger 25 years ago.
We basically interviewed people all around him, interviewed his friends. We found Jim Meacham. Jim is a good friend of Ryan's. They hung out, they've known each other for years. They kind of ran in the same circle. We interviewed him, and he recalled how he found out that Gail had been murdered. Jim, he would go to Ryan's house in the morning and he would have coffee with Ryan before he'd go to work sometimes. And he said it would be really, really early. He had gone there the day the bodies were discovered. And Ryan was up and Pam was up, and he's like, they're both crying, tears and everything. And he's like, what's wrong? And he said that Ryan had said, my sister's been murdered. The importance of that is Rick and Gail were not found murdered until 11 o'clock in the morning on that Monday. So the only way he could tell Jim Meacham that they were dead that early is if he was involved in the homicide.
After 25 years of investigation, Detectives have found a flaw in Ryan Wingarden's timeline that convinces them of his guilt.
So you've got motive and you've got opportunity. You've got them both in spades. But you're going to need more than that to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person committed this murder.
Armed with their new information, detectives decide to re-interview his wife, Pam.
Along with the fact that she had lied to police about his alibi, we knew that she was hiding information. That's a lot of pressure on an individual.
But we said, you know what? She is a victim too. She's basically married this man after he may have done this horrible thing, and you have to get her to feel comfortable to come out with this information and share it. So at that point, Dave and I then made the decision to go to Pam's work. We just basically said, you know, we'd like to talk to you. And she said, yeah, I'll listen. We said, we are giving you the opportunity to come forward and tell us your story. The truth is gonna come out. You need to do what's right for your kids.
And we said, Pam, you need to come clean on this deal. Which she did.
She basically came out and admitted that Ryan had come over that night, was all upset, and had said, I killed Rick and Gail.
Pam's confession, along with the reconstructed timeline, lays out the final hours of Rick and Gail Brink and how a secret between siblings was the spark for their murder.
On Saturday, they went to the wedding. A bunch of people went to the bar after the wedding, and they were at the bar till probably around 11-ish. They would have been home no later than 11:30. Rick and Gail were up watching TV.
Ryan came over. There was a confrontation.
I think Ryan knew that Rick knew and about the abusive relationship that he had with his sister. And I think Ryan was jealous of the life that Gail was starting to get for herself.
Gail told Ryan to get out and not to come back.
Gail turned around, walked down the hall, went to bed. And at that point, Rick looked at him and said, you really need to go. So Ryan then left the home. Ryan came back to the door saying he had car trouble. And then Rick had slipped on his galoshes. He still had on his wedding attire, put his old work coat on, went, got in the truck in the driver's side. And that's where Ryan shot him with a .22 in the head. He then went in the house, walked back to the bedroom, where he then shot Gail in the head 3 times. Ryan then went back over to Pam's house. He then takes Pam back to Rick and Gail's home where he killed him. He then takes her back to the bedroom where he shows her Gail, and he actually is the one that puts the pillow on her head. And he indicates to her, if you tell anybody, this will happen to you. They then go back to Ryan's home. Ryan does take clothing items in the gun in a bag, and he discards them somewhere. You know, years went on, they had this secret. They just buried it.
Detectives have enough to arrest Ryan Wingarden.
I read him his rights, and I asked him no questions. But it was the look on Ryan's face.
He adamantly said that we badgered Pam, that she's only saying that because she wants a divorce, and, and how dare she, just anything but accept responsibility for it.
His mode was jealousy, and that he was going to be exposed about his sexual abuse with his sister.
On March 28, 2014, 26 years after the murder of Gail and Rick Brink, a jury finds Wingarden guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He is appealing his conviction.
When I look at Ryan, what do I see? I just see darkness. I felt like we had pulled a piece of darkness out of the world.
Dave and Venus, the cold case team, they worked their hearts out. I was thankful that they got to the bottom of it.
We brought the right person to justice, but it's always there, and I think it's sad for both families. The Weingarten family, they lost their daughter by the hands of their own son. The Brinks, they lost their son, and they lost a daughter-in-law. It's just something their family will always have to deal with.